Yeah, our prediction is that Bitcoin's going to get over $200,000 by the end of the year. I think you're going to see 10, maybe more governments around the world make their first allocation to Bitcoin this year. It's happening. People aren't talking about it that much, but it's happening and it's a very big deal.
이 사람은 미국 최대 암호화폐 자산 운용사 중 하나, 비트와이즈의 CIO 매트 호건입니다. 수천억 원 규모의 자산을 실제로 운영하는 전문가의 눈에 지금의 코인 시장은 어떻게 보일까요? 이번 인터뷰에서는 호건이 직접 전하는 비트코인 시장에 대한 날카로운 분석, 그리고 이더리움, XRP를 비롯한 주요 알트코인에 대한 전략적 시각까지 담겨 있습니다. 시장을 움직이는 변화의 흐름, 지금 바로 확인해 보시죠.
Let's get straight to it. Bitcoin. What's happening with the price currently? What's going to happen to the price in the next 9 months?
Yeah, our prediction is that Bitcoin's going to get over $200,000 by the end of the year. What's happening right now is you have a huge amount of good news in Bitcoin. You have a US strategic reserve where the government now owns Bitcoin. You have improvements on the regulatory front. You have institutional adoption. You may be wondering, why aren't prices higher? The reason is we've had a bunch of economic uncertainty that's caused not just Bitcoin, but all risky assets to fall. Stocks are down substantially. So the market has dipped, but I think over time, as that economic volatility subsides, you're going to see all that good news catch up to Bitcoin, and it's going to propel it to new all-time highs and indeed above $200,000 for the year.
What do we have to see? Like, is there a sign that we have to see for all that to happen?
Yeah, there are two things to keep your eye on. So one, Bitcoin's price is set by supply and demand, and we all know the supply, right? There'll only be 21 million. We only make 165,000 new ones a year. So you have to watch the demand. The three things to watch are ETFs gaining inflows, are corporations like MicroStrategy and Metaplanet continuing to buy Bitcoin, and our government's buying Bitcoin. If those three things happen, I think the $200,000 target is a lock. So I would keep your eye on that. It would help if the economy improves, if we don't enter a recession, that would help. But it's really about, does the demand materialize in the way I think it will? Every sign that I see suggests that ETFs are buying, corporations are buying, and governments are buying. That's why I'm so bullish, but they have to keep buying in order for us to get to that $200,000 target.
You said they keep on buying. At what scale are we talking about?
Yeah, so last year ETFs bought 500,000 Bitcoin. Again, remember, the Bitcoin network only produced 165,000 Bitcoin. So it bought 3 times the total supply. Corporations bought 250,000 Bitcoin. Governments, I think this year could buy a couple 100,000 Bitcoin. So I think if you look at those 3 sources, I think they'll buy more than 1 million Bitcoin this year. And where is it going to come from? The only place it can come from is people who already hold Bitcoin. The only way they will sell is if the price goes up. That's why I'm so bullish on the market.
Sorry, government? Which branch of the government?
Look, the US already established a strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? It already holds $17 billion in Bitcoin. And the executive order from President Trump told the Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of Treasury to figure out ways to acquire more Bitcoin without impacting the tax holder. How could they do that? They could sell some of the gold that the US has. They could sell other crypto assets that the US has and plow that into Bitcoin. I think we're going to see that happen this year. I think the US is going to increase, and not just the US. We found out that Abu Dhabi bought $500 million of Bitcoin. We've gotten calls from multiple other governments that are investigating Bitcoin. I think you're going to see 10, maybe more governments around the world make their first allocation to Bitcoin this year. It's happening. People aren't talking about it that much, but it's happening and it's a very big deal.
I want to get your comment on the crypto stockpile. Why do you think they pick Solana, Ethereum, Cardano, and XRP?
Yeah, first it's important to remember that there's a difference between the strategic reserve, which is Bitcoin only, and this crypto asset stockpile. My base case is that they looked at the market and they took the largest assets, right? Those are essentially the largest assets, excluding a few assets, excluding Binance Coin, excluding Tron.
Doge.
Excluding Doge, yes, they didn't want Doge. But it's maybe the largest sort of US-centric blockchains. I don't think there's more to it than that. But I think the strategic reserve is the big deal. The stockpile is just going to hold those assets. The strategic reserve, I think, is going to go out into the market and end up acquiring more Bitcoin. I think that's a very big deal.
What is going to happen once we have a recession?
Recessions negatively impact all risk assets until the government decides to provide economic support.
So Bitcoin is a risk asset.
It is a risk asset in the short term. So if we look like we're driving into a recession and the government doesn't look like it's going to lower interest rates or provide quantitative easing or fiscal support, that will be negative for Bitcoin. That could send us back to the $72,000 level. It could send us potentially below that. But my guess is that governments will come in and support the economy. I think we've made it very difficult to have a real recession. I know we're talking tough in the US, but I think the government will ultimately blink. I think you'll see that in Europe. You're already seeing Germany doing that. I think you'll see that in parts of Asia. You're seeing economic stimulus in China right now. I think that's going to grow. So ultimately, I think we'll blink before we get a big recession. But if we do enter a severe recession, my $200,000 target probably won't happen. That would be challenging for Bitcoin.
매트 호건은 이번 인터뷰에서 2025년 말까지 비트코인이 20만 달러를 돌파할 가능성이 높다고 주장했는데요. 그 근거로는 수요와 공급의 불균형, 그리고 기관 및 정부의 매수 확대를 꼽았습니다. 결국 비트코인의 시장 가격은 수요와 공급의 법칙에 따라 결정됩니다. 지금 비트코인의 공급은 연간 약 16만 5천 개로 제한되어 있는 반면 ETF들은 작년에만 50만 개를 매수했고 마이크로 스트래티지는 작년 25만 개 이상을 추가 매수한 데 이어 올해만 해도 이미 13만 개를 추가 매수했습니다. 그리고 지금은 많은 기업들이 제2의 스트래티지를 꿈꾸며 비트코인을 매집 중입니다. 여기에 더해 세계 각국의 정부들까지도 수십만 개 규모의 매수를 준비 중이라는 전망까지 나오고 있습니다. 이처럼 비트코인에 대한 수요는 갈수록 커지고 있고 가격이 오를수록 더 큰 수요를 자극하는 선순환 구조로 이어질 가능성이 높습니다. 물론 이 모든 전제는 심각한 경기 침체가 발생하지 않을 경우인데요. 호건은 각국 정부들이 적극적인 경기 부양에 나설 가능성이 크기 때문에 실제 침체로 이어지진 않을 것이라는 쪽에 무게를 두고 있습니다. 결론적으로 호건은 지금이 비트코인을 재평가할 타이밍이라며 ETF 자금 유입, 기관의 매수 움직임, 정부의 비트코인 편입, 이 세 가지 수요 지표를 반드시 주의 깊게 지켜보라고 강조합니다.
XRP.
Yeah.
You filed for an XRP ETF, but let's say for the crypto community, it's not considered the sexy bet,
That's right.
I want to know your thought, why XRP? And maybe just a low forecast?
Yeah, sure. The way I think about XRP is it's proven a few things. It's a blockchain that's worked for a very long period of time. It's extremely low cost to operate. It processes high amounts of transaction volume at very low cost. It has a strong community. The problem with XRP is it hasn't developed its primary use cases. It was designed to be a B2B blockchain, right? Business to business transactions, international payments. That really hasn't materialized. I would argue the reason it hasn't materialized is it faced a major lawsuit from the SEC, existential regulatory threat, and now we get to see what it can do. There's no guarantee that it succeeds. I think it's entirely possible that you would come back and do an interview in 2 years and nothing happened on XRP, the ETF didn't gather assets and the asset is down. But I think what the crypto community misses is it's also possible that now that they're able to try to execute on their strategy, that they in fact succeed. And you're seeing significant technological progress on the XRPR ledger. So I would say it's a divisive coin for a reason, which is there are worlds where it amounts to nothing and worlds where it's very successful. We'll see which world materializes in the next few years, but people who guarantee it will be a huge success are wrong, and people who guarantee it will go to zero are also wrong. We think it's in the middle.
Why is Bitcoin still being treated as a leverage play on the NASDAQ? In other words, going into the future, what's going to cause a divergence between Bitcoin and traditional equities?
Yeah, so interesting you ask. Here's what we see in the data. What we see in the data is that when there's a challenging moment for like the NASDAQ, Bitcoin dips and then rips. What do I mean by that? If you look at all the days where the S&P 500 is down 2% or more over the last decade, Bitcoin on average is down 2.6% on those days. So it's actually worse than just holding stocks. But if you fast forward a year from there, it's up 190% on average. So I think what happens is it's, again, a risk asset. When the market goes risk off, you increase your discount factor on risk assets. And the more volatile they are, the harder they fall. But the long-term tailwind is so strong that they pick back up. I actually look at those dips, like the one we've seen this year, which you mentioned at the top. I think a phenomenal opportunity because from my view, the long-term outlook for where Bitcoin is going is better today than it was 6 months ago and better than it was 2 years ago. And if that's the case, this pullback is just a discount. Bitcoin's on sale. That's what I think is true.
So you're buying the dip,
I am buying the dip, absolutely.
but only Bitcoin though.
Well, yes. I think Bitcoin has the cleanest case right now. I'm very optimistic on Ethereum. I'm very optimistic on Solana, but I think they have more sort of wood to chop, work to do before they get out of their existential troubles. You have to see regulation pass. You have to see institutional DeFi. You have to see greater adoption. If you're a long-term investor, this is a great time to access Ethereum or Solana. If you're a short-term investor, I think there could be volatility ahead. Bitcoin, I think, has clear sailing. Some of the DeFi assets, I think, have clear sailing. Those layer ones in the middle, I think, could face more months of churn.
You said DeFi products. What are we talking about?
Yeah, so if you look at things like Uniswap or Ondo Finance or Aave, the activity on those is at all-time highs. And they've proven themselves through multiple volatile markets, and the regulation is improving significantly. And so I think we're going to see people realize that those are already at all-time highs. We're just not thinking about them. So as excited as we were about DeFi in 2021 and the DeFi summer, we were all thinking about those assets. People have sort of forgotten about them, but behind the scenes, their business is better than ever. And it's actually growing really fast, and they actually benefit from the huge regulatory shift in Washington. I think there could be a DeFi boom at the end of this year. So if I were looking for sort of the safe play in crypto, I would look at Bitcoin. If I were looking for underloved assets that could really be revalued, I would look all the way down to things like Uniswap and Aave. I think there's a real opportunity there.
Like the OG DeFi coins.
Yes, absolutely, the OG DeFi coins.
That's going to come from the retail side or the institutional side, you think?
Well, I think a little bit of both. First retail, then institutional. I do think institutions are waking up to the fact that DeFi is a real thing and not going away. And I think Wall Street's going to start building on DeFi. So I think there'll be an institutional play, but retail will be first. Retail are the people who know those protocols and are using those protocols. And I think we'll start to look at the TVL and the trading activity and be like, wow, we're at all-time highs. ETH's not at an all-time high, but the activity on Aave is, maybe I should think about that as an investment vehicle as well.
호건은 알트코인에 대한 분석도 이야기했는데요. 호건이 운영하는 비트와이즈가 제출한 XRP ETF에 대해서도 논의가 진행 중입니다. 호건은 XRP가 가진 기술적 안정성과 유틸리티 가능성, 규제 리스크 해소 이후 기회에 주목해야 한다고 말합니다. 국제결제 인프라로서의 역할은 아직 실현되지는 않았지만 XRP가 SEC와의 소송이라는 본질적 규제 리스크가 해소된 시점에서 그 기회의 문이 열렸다는 것에 베팅하고 있는 셈입니다. 이더리움과 솔라나에 대해서도 그는 기술력과 잠재력은 인정하지만 여전히 규제 통과, 기간 디파이 참여, 대중 채택이라는 과제가 남아있다고 봅니다. 즉, 이 자산들이 본질적인 위기를 완전히 벗어나기 위해선 아직 시간이 필요하다는 것이 호건의 판단입니다. 특히 그는 기간 자금이 본격 유입되기 전 리테일 투자자들이 먼저 움직일 것이라 내다봤습니다. 반면 호건은 디파이 프로토콜에 대해서는 꽤 강한 확신을 보입니다. 유니스왑이나 에이브 같은 OG 디파이 프로젝트들은 지금도 활동량이 역대 최고치이며 규제 환경도 과거보다 훨씬 우호적으로 바뀌고 있다고 평가합니다. 그는 2021년의 디파이 여름보다 오히려 지금이 실제 성과는 더 좋다며 사람들이 관심을 잃어버린 지금이야말로 저평가된 기회를 잡을 수 있는 순간이라고 강조합니다. 그리고 혹시 거래 수수료 절반을 다시 환급받는 방법 아직 모르시나요? 단 5분만 투자하면 평생 수수료 돌려받는 셀퍼럴, 선택이 아닌 필수입니다. 자세한 내용은 영상 더보기란을 확인해보세요.
If you could go back to your younger self and just give yourself a piece of investment advice, what would it be?
Yeah, buy Bitcoin, right? Come on, we all should have done that. Look, the thing that we've experienced in crypto is the most important thing is to stay allocated, right? That would be the advice.
오늘 영상 도움이 되셨다면 구독, 좋아요 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.